right, so today we're diving into the world of salt. It's something we all use every day, but it turns out salt is a lot more than just a simple seasoning. We're actually going to be talking about the different types of salt and how they relate to hydration and even how we feel. So you've given me this really interesting comparison here of table salt, Himalayan pink salt, and Celtic sea salt. And also this lecture by health expert Barbara O'Neill.
Yeah, salt is definitely one of those things we kind of take for granted.
Yeah.
But this comparison you've got really highlights the differences between these different salts, not just in how they look, but also how they're processed and even what's in them.
Yeah, that's so true. Like just looking at them, you've got your typical white table salt crystals. Then there's the pink Himalayan salt, which I've got to admit looks amazing in a salt grinder. And then you've got Celtic sea salt, which is more like
Well,
kind of rough and gray looking. But it's what's going on beyond just how they look that I found really interesting.
exactly. And that all comes down to how they're processed. Table salt is heavily processed. It's refined, bleached, and usually has anti-caking agents added in. Himalayan pink salt and Celtic sea salt, on the other hand, are minimally processed, so they keep more of those minerals that are naturally in them.
Right. And that seems to be a big part of why people think Himalayan pink salt is so healthy. I noticed in this comparison chart that it does have more minerals than table salt, but the amounts are really small.
Yeah, for sure. You'd have to eat a ridiculous amount of salt to really get any significant health benefits from the trace minerals in Himalayan pink salt.
Interesting. So where does that leave Celtic sea salt in all of this?
Well, Celtic sea salt actually comes out on top in terms of mineral content. It's got a lot of magnesium, which is important for your muscles, but it's actually used in over 300 processes in your body. In this lecture, O'Neill actually says that Celtic sea salt can be really good for athletes. She specifically mentions that it can help with muscle cramps. Like if you take it before working out, it could reduce cramps by up to 22%.
22%. Wow. That's amazing. I run marathons and muscle cramps are like my worst enemy. I am definitely going to have to try that out. So that's the basics of those different salts. But then we get to this O'Neill lecture, and things got really fascinating. She basically says that we all know water is important, but it's salt that helps our bodies actually use that water. And what I thought was really interesting was that she said those minerals in salt, especially sodium, are super important for getting the water into our cells.
Yeah, it's like those minerals help pull the water into the cells where it's needed.
Right. And then she talks about how sodium is like the third most important element for life after oxygen and water. I knew it was important, but I had no idea it was that important.
Yeah, and she explains that it's really important in transporting glucose, which our bodies need for energy. So that kind of goes against the whole idea that we should avoid salt completely, especially since most people don't even get the recommended 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day anyway. O'Neill actually says that when we avoid good salts like Celtic sea salt, we might be doing ourselves more harm than good.
And then she made the point that table salt might actually be bad for our taste buds because it doesn't have enough of those minerals.
Exactly. Celtic sea salt has a lot of different minerals, so it actually makes food taste better. Instead of just making it taste salty, it actually brings out the other flavors. O'Neill is all about using less salt, but better quality salt to really make the flavors of your food shine through.
And then she mentions this really practical thing about hydration. She says if you take a pinch of Celtic sea salt before you drink water, it actually helps your body absorb the water better. I have to admit, I was a little skeptical when I first heard that.
It makes sense if you think about how it works scientifically. Remember osmosis and those sodium-potassium pumps we learned about? Well, they help keep the fluid levels balanced in your body. And when you have a little bit of Celtic sea salt, especially before you drink water, it creates this thing called an electrolyte gradient that helps pull the water into your cells.
Wow, so just a tiny bit of salt can make such a big difference. She even talks about how she'll have salt and water instead of coffee in the afternoon.
Makes you think maybe we drink so much caffeine and sugary drinks because we're actually just dehydrated.
It's a really good point. I'm going to try to be more aware of how much water I'm drinking from now on.
It's like our pancreas can't keep up when we're dehydrated. It might not make enough insulin and glucagon. And those are the hormones that balance our blood sugar. O'Neill was saying that dehydration can mess with that balance, and that can lead to those energy crashes we get and those crazy sugar cravings.
Oh, wow, that makes so much sense. You always hear about how diet and exercise are important for your blood sugar, but no one ever talks about hydration.
It's such an important part of it, and it doesn't stop there. O'Neill also says that dehydration can cause headaches, which makes sense when you think about it. Our brains need water to work properly. She even says that being dehydrated could be linked to negative thoughts, like literally. When brain cells are dehydrated, they shrink. And that could affect our mood and how well we think.
So maybe when we feel that afternoon slump coming on, we should be grabbing a glass of water with a pinch of Celtic sea salt instead of that extra cup of coffee.
It's definitely something to think about. And this one really surprised me. O'Neill talks about how dehydration can affect our joints. Apparently that fluid that surrounds our joints, it's called synovial fluid, was mostly made of water.
Right. That makes sense. But how does being dehydrated affect that fluid?
Well, when we don't have enough water in our bodies have to prioritize. So they send water to the most important organs first. And that means our joints might not get all the hydration they need, which is why our joints can feel stiff and achy sometimes.
Wow, so our bodies are always making these adjustments in the background.
Exactly. And it just shows how connected everything in our bodies really is. O'Neill also talked about how important hydration is for our lungs. She explained that if we're dehydrated, we might not breathe as well.
Really? I never would have guessed that. What's the connection between dehydration and breathing?
So at the bottom of our lungs, we have these tiny air sacs called alveoli. And those little sacs are what exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. And each one has this tiny little droplet of water on it. So when we breathe out, the water helps the alveoli collapse. And that's what pushes the carbon dioxide out. But when we're dehydrated, those little droplets shrink. And it makes it harder for the alveoli to collapse properly.
Wow, that's incredible. So even being a little bit dehydrated can have a big impact on something as essential as breathing.
Exactly. Our bodies are always sending us signals. Thirst isn't just an inconvenience. It's our body telling us that we need to replenish our water. And it's not just about drinking a ton of water all at once. O'Neill says it's really important to sip water consistently throughout the day and to be mindful of things like coffee and tea, because those drinks can actually dehydrate us.
Right, she mentioned a study where a pathologist found that you need to drink 5 cups of water just to make up for 1 cup of coffee.
5 cups. That's crazy when you think about it. It's really easy to get dehydrated without realizing it, especially if we're drinking things that actually dehydrate us.
Yeah, it really makes you realize how important it is to pay attention to what we're drinking and how it might be affecting our bodies. One thing that really stood out to me was O'Neill's discussion on dehydration and our brains.
Absolutely. She says dehydration is a major factor in cognitive decline, especially as we get older. And she even shared this story about a woman in her 70s who was having these symptoms like dementia. And it turned out she was severely dehydrated.
Really?
Yeah, so they had her drink more water and address some other basic needs. And within 24 hours, her brain function had improved dramatically. O'Neill uses that story to show that even when it seems like cognitive decline is permanent, sometimes addressing dehydration can make a huge difference.
That's amazing. It makes you wonder how many other health problems could be helped by something as simple as drinking more water.
Exactly. It really emphasizes how important it is to look at the whole picture and to make sure we're covering the basics, like proper hydration, before looking for more complicated solutions.
Right. It's about building that strong foundation for our health.
Exactly.
It's easy to get caught up in all the latest health fads and forget about the simple stuff, the things our bodies really need.
Totally. O'Neill's not saying to ignore what your doctor tells you or anything like that. It's more about finding a good balance. Like, yeah, conventional treatments are important, but we also need to recognize that our bodies can heal themselves, especially if we support them in the right ways.
Right, like making sure we're drinking enough water, getting enough sleep, dealing with stress, all that basic stuff that we should be doing anyway.
Exactly. She talks about it like a partnership. Our bodies are amazing at healing, and we can help them out by making smart choices.
I love that. It makes you realize that we have a lot more control over our health than we think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a really important message that I got from O'Neill. It's not just about knowing the information. It's about changing how we see things, like really understanding how incredible our bodies are.
It's like she's saying, hey, your body's got your back. Just listen to it, take care of it, work with it instead of against it.
Exactly. And once we understand that, even something as simple as drinking enough water and using the right kind of salt, it's not a chore anymore. It's like we're taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, it's about making choices that make us feel good, physically, mentally, the whole package.
And as we've seen from this deep dive, those little choices can have a huge impact on our overall health.
For sure. So after all of this, I'm definitely looking at salt and water in a whole new light. I'm definitely going to be making some changes. What about you? What really resonated with you from all of this? And are you planning on changing anything in your own life because of it?
You know what really struck me was how O'Neill kept talking about how connected everything in our bodies is. Like, who knew that not drinking enough water could affect our energy levels and our mood and even how well our brains work? It just goes to show that we should never underestimate those simple things. Like whenever we have a health issue, we should ask ourselves, could this just be because I'm dehydrated? It seems so straightforward, but it's easy to forget, especially when we're dealing with more complicated health stuff.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. So much great information to think about. Thank you for joining me.
It's been my pleasure.